I've heard some people argue that technically healthcare for tech is boring because the challenges on the technology side are not there.
You can't fix healthcare, because if you say that, then I think you need 10 of you or a million of you to go into different aspects of healthcare to fix.
So let's face it, anyone working in healthcare gets into healthcare to help people, right? You don't get into healthcare to make money. There's better industries for that.
And with healthcare, you have to be more human-centric than probably anything else.
I always like to say that healthcare is like I always react allergic to when somebody says, yeah, we're trying to fix healthcare as a startup, right? Because by default, a bad goal, like anyone who would, if you're looking to goal setting, like that's the worst goal you can have. And I think that sort of mindset, if you have that,
I think the biggest portion is getting the homework done before the actual development takes place. Welcome, I'm Dr. Umer Khan, and you are here with Khanversations, the podcast where we dive deep into the intersections of technology, AI, innovation, and leadership. And today, we have here Johannes Boshkow, who is the Business Development Director at Dawn Health with an extensive experience in healthcare development and marketing. They have launched software as a medical device products for life science companies and creating regulated solutions driven by their passion to change people's life. So this is a Danish-born company, and they have an internationally driven team, and their teams and experts deliver products related to healthcare all over the world. Johannes, how are you doing today?
I'm doing very well. How are you doing?
I am well. Thanks for being here today. And I know you're located in Switzerland. Is that correct?
Yeah, right in the center of Switzerland. Beautiful snow right now. It's nice and cold winter here.
So you prefer the snow. I actually avoid the snow. I actually look to run away from the snow. I think we are the polar opposites.
Well, running away from snow in Switzerland would make you very lonely. No, we can't avoid it. But I guess the definitions of snow in New York versus the middle of Switzerland are also a little bit different. We have it nice and white and clean and cleared out of the road as well.
Right, great. No, so Dawn Health. So this is a company, I think, emanating from Copenhagen. Is that correct?
Yeah. So our headquarters is in Copenhagen. So that's where actually most of the team sits. I don't have an exact percentage, but we have technically only a few people on the commercial side sitting outside of Copenhagen, and everyone else sits. All the developers, all the architects, all the designers, quality, regulatory, clinical. Everyone sits in Copenhagen under one roof to have a very good team cohesion and deliver projects as best as we can. I'm sorry, I'm biased. Obviously, I'm a salesperson, but yeah, that's sort of what we drive forward.
All right, great. So yeah, this is a internationally distributed world now, and people are remote. Some people are in the office, and you just need to get the job done. So tell me a little bit about Dawn Health. Where did it start, and where is it going right now?
So you'd have to ask, obviously, our founder. I joined because of the story, because it is kind of fun. So it started from the belief of digital solutions and digital health solutions can be done better, right? There were 7 years ago or so, there were a lot of solutions out there, and we can talk about that a little bit later, and different challenges with the solutions. And our founder believed strongly that those solutions can be developed better and that companies can be helped better. So they started working with a lot of medtech and pharma companies in designing solutions, launching solutions, making sure they're sound, making sure they're used, and so on and so forth, and started developing capabilities more and more to become sort of one of the leading companies that can deliver a whole set of solution rather than specializing in a certain area, really making sure that you can, while staying nimble and staying agile, go from a very early idea to actually running a solution in market and maintaining all of the things that need to be maintained at the same time.
Exactly. So can you give us a few, so that the viewers have an idea, what type of products have you worked on? Of course, you can only disclose what you can.
Yeah, so we work with a couple of the leading pharmaceutical companies. We specialize sort of in design, right? So we specialize in custom built solutions that are very well designed and very well used. Most of the time that is applied in either the patient companion or connected health side. So when you have connected delivery devices, when you have on-body injectors and glucose monitors and so on and so forth, wearables, and how you build user interfaces around that. The other side could obviously also be then for people such as yourself, clinical decision support systems, and other support solutions that sort of require substantial regulation and substantial verification, validation, as well as good design, so that it don't cause more trouble. I think those are sort of the areas that we've worked in. To give you a few pointers, I know one I can talk about very openly. We've launched very recently multiple sclerosis, what we consider remote disease management solution with Novartis, that basically works on patient self-reporting and capturing their symptoms, being able to inform their discussion with the physicians, with the neurologists, and then being sort of that side companion and how you make that to be. And we're driving that forward to more personalized insights, a better way for patients to support themselves, a better way for patients to understand their disease, and so on and so forth.
Exactly. So basically, you're looking at health sciences and products that actually affect the person at the personal level, possibly, and you are looking to
Yes.
improve their health through feedback, through interventions, and get information and data and collect that to actually improve the patient experience and the disease management. Is that correct?
Yes, exactly. So connecting the different stakeholders, right? It depends a little bit. So again, we're building custom built solutions, meaning it needs to be addressed for very specific needs, right? You wouldn't come, I mean, we don't want to be in the situation where we just launch an app for everything and launch something here and there. What we believe in very centrally is human-centered design, right? So any solution we launch needs to be desirable by the user, and the user in this case typically means more than just a patient. It could be caregivers as well. It could be physicians. It could be nurses. It could be all kinds of stakeholders in the healthcare ecosystem. Obviously, we know that it's fairly complex. It needs to be viable. So it needs to have a business model below it that doesn't just burn cash for the fun of it, right? It can't be a marketing exercise, so to say. It needs to be a fundamentally an anchored product that can measure business impact for our clients, because we know that otherwise it is not sustainable, and it needs to create a lasting impact. And the last part is that it also needs to be technically feasible. So obviously we want to stay as much ahead of the curve as we can in terms of technological implementations, but we need to be realistic about what stability and what trust and patient safety is involved in these technologies. So the feasibility is also a very important aspect.
No, absolutely. And I remember when I was working on the COVID-19 monitoring unit, inpatient within the hospital, and that was when COVID hit smack in New York, and you were seeing truckloads outside hospitals. It was horrible. And the issues were that doctors are not available, nurses are not always available. Some patients need to be seen, some patients do not need to be seen, and of course you need to avoid unnecessary exposure to COVID at that point when there was no vaccination, nothing else, and there were numerous reports of healthcare providers also getting sick and even dying. And in Switzerland and Italy, that was a part of the world where this also was a epicenter early on. So, and you had to figure out, okay, what does the doctor need, what does the patient need, what does the nursing staff need? And the huge aspect that was certainly missed during COVID was the families. The patients were not able to talk to their family members. The family couldn't visit the patients. So we had to develop a system that caters for the patient, the doctor, the nurse, and a monitoring setup that gives the clinician vitals, so they can monitor the patient remotely, talk into the patient, different types of messaging systems, and it's needed to work flawlessly, that all the stakeholders are happy and they're getting their value. And of course, the hospital is also getting their own financial benefit from that. So exactly, so that has to be done in the healthcare spectra. You cannot have a top-heavy approach. You have to see where actually the rubber is meeting the road, and you have to fix it from that. You have to go from ground up to actually make a difference and actually provide some tangible benefit. And I believe this is the name of the game here. You have to meet where the patient is, where the doctor is, especially for these type of products, life sciences products. So given all of this, and I could see and envision and see that how many technical challenges could be faced, especially in healthcare, regarding HIPAA, regarding privacy, regarding cybersecurity, And how do you have you seen problems? How do you deal with this? What is your approach with this?
So we follow obviously very heavily the regulatory frameworks for these things, right? So we do, as I said, we do try to stay ahead of the curve. So we do follow the frameworks that are being put out there. I think there are some very good aspects here. Heavy testing, heavy making sure that what we build is sound and what we build is safe. I think that is something that is baked into what we do, right? Going back to what I said in the beginning on the founding of Dawn Health and where that comes, right? It is a tech company specialized in healthcare, and I think that's a very important part. So originally, it does come out of a sort of broader conglomerate as well that works a lot across sectors. But the interesting part is that you can ask anyone that works in a big tech company in health, I think, but even in the smaller ones, healthcare has its own intricacies. So we work specifically in healthcare. So we do know all of the regulations. We do know all of the security frameworks, all of the regulatory frameworks, and we check them very constantly at the beginning of the projects. As I said, right, like when someone comes to us with an idea, that's when people from these scenarios get involved, right? It's not like we're just drawing something up on paper and then we'll run it through, is that technologically possible? And then we start developing, and then it gets dropped onto, someone in a consultancy saying, okay, so how do we make this regulatory sound and like safe and so on and so forth? No, for us, that all starts right at the beginning. I think that's the part that, as you mentioned, right, like all the stakeholders need to be aligned. That's the same on our side. Everyone needs to be on the table and everyone needs to work together, right? I went back to why we want everyone to sit in the same office. It's exactly for that specific reason, so that there is nothing lost in translation, nothing lost anywhere in the process, because I think that is where a lot of solutions break.
Exactly. So the question comes here is that, and this makes healthcare a bit more expensive to get into. And when you're starting a health tech company, you just don't need, the founder, the developers, the software engineers. You don't need the subject matter expert. You also need a lawyer. You also need an accountant. You also need full-fledged cybersecurity experts, and that can just raise the bar for people who want to get into health tech, especially health tech. And then, of course, you have to look at payers. You need to have an insider who actually knows the system. So this could all make getting into healthcare, IT, and nowadays AI and all this much more difficult than probably a few other fields. I don't want to minimize any other field in technology. However, this could make things certainly more difficult. Has that been your approach as such?
Yes, I think that's exactly the learning. I think that's where. So let's face it, anyone working in healthcare gets into healthcare to help people, right? You don't get into healthcare to make money. There's better industries for that. So because everyone is fundamentally in there, that's who's being drawn to the company as well, and who's being drawn to join us and work. And that shared passion actually goes then back into basically exactly what you just translated, right? So exactly what you just said around the need for cohesive teams that take serious all the different functions that are being pulled in, right? So even if you work in finance, if you work in HR, you know why you work in HR in Dawn Health and what the entire company vision is, right? So you're doing this to enable. And I think that's a very great passion, because you wouldn't say that in our teams and the products we develop, there's anyone in there who is like, okay, I'm the forefront of what is going on. I'm the one who's driving that change. I'm the one who's doing all of that. No, it's always the teams, the different functionalities. Everyone is bringing their own piece to the table, their own expertise to the table to make sure that that team can operate as efficiently as possible and as successful as possible. And I think that's something that is a realization that is very important, and that, as you said, makes it very hard for new people to start into it, because I've always had that. It's always funny when you do that, right? I've talked to companies where that are smaller startups, right? And because they consider themselves disruptors in sort of the healthcare space, there's a high chance that in healthcare there's a lot of complex things, right? So if you have a specific technology that can disrupt, that doesn't mean you have the business model to support it. So they're then tempted to say, okay, we'll also disrupt the business side of healthcare. And then there's a regulatory framework. So they might also want to disrupt the regulatory framework. And obviously, disruption is difficult and challenging enough as is. But if you don't pay attention to there is business model, there's regulation, there is sort of best practices in place for a reason. Sometimes they need to be challenged or questioned, but you need to pick your battles.
No, exactly. And this is where, the problem happens. And with healthcare, you have to be more human centric than probably anything else. And when now AI coming into the mix, now that ends up being a bigger question. How do you maintain that human centric approach? And your goal is patient satisfaction, patient outcomes. That is basically your goal. And when all of this business, legals, they enter the fold with this, it just makes things a bit more difficult, and people lose track of this. And a lot of startups, health tech startups, they lose track of this, and that does lead to, they can't pivot quickly enough. That leads to, in a way, their downfall. They lose track of who is their target audience. And in healthcare, it is health, the person's health that is involved here. And so you have to keep a focus on that. You have to circle all of your activities around that particular aspect, that you have to improve the person's health. You have to produce better outcomes. You have to reduce costs somehow. Reduce costs, but at least by the same time, you have to improve the patient outcome. Reducing costs itself won't get you anywhere.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree. I think there is a substantial challenge, as you just highlighted, in the different stakeholders and the different objectives, right? You get distracted so easily. I think healthcare is one of the few areas, we know it's one of the few areas where you have the patient's outcomes in mind. So you need to support the patient. The person making the decision is the physician, though, right? So you need to also keep the physician in mind. The person paying for that is yet the third person, right? Then the person actually taking care of things, the people that have to measure. Like, there's so many stakeholders that come into play one after the other. I'm not going to say competing incentives, but to some extent, there sometimes is that aspect.
I believe there are competing incentives as well.
There are,
yeah. I think you can say that. That's fine. I approve of that. Yes.
But yes, and that makes it complicated, because you can get distracted very easily, right? Like, you could be a health tech startup, and that has happened in the past, right? You could be a health tech startup that exclusively talks to payers because that's your primary audience, and then you want to optimize for payers. You make it to the payer, you make it to market and everything, and then the product is not used because you failed to talk to a patient to actually make sure that what you're delivering is actually being used, because they're the actual users, right? Same thing can happen with physicians, right? Like, you optimize for physicians, but then you fail to take into account the payer, and then at some point they're like, well, but we can pay for this. You're like hitting none of the goals that we want, right? Like, you're not optimizing for what we needed to be optimized for. So you can get distracted, and you can go down the wrong track for a long time, and starting from scratch at that stage is expensive, and that's where a lot of things fail.
Exactly. And one of the biggest, as you mentioned, stakeholder in this whole spectra is the clinician, is the provider, is the physician, right? Is the nursing staff. And it has to be that the physician, the job of the physician, the nurse, is actually enhanced or improved, or the flow is not disrupted, or if there is a disruption, it's a positive disruption, that the disruption is not something that will increase the time they have to spend on doing technical aspects or staying on the computer. It has to be something that actually provides value, the patient feedback, the patient input, the patient vitals, perhaps, and you're able to provide more value than is already available. And that is innovation, But again, you have to make the users, the patient, the physician, the pharmacist, the nurse, anybody who's actually, where the rubber is hitting the meeting the road over here, it has to benefit all of them. And that is the trick over here. And how do you go about this? Do you have subject matter experts who work with this? I know you deal with companies who may already have their own staff on hand. How do you actually look to find and try to see that, okay, yes, this product will actually work? And you mentioned about testing. And how do you go about with this testing phase?
So we do have several designers, behavioral scientists on staff. We obviously also work with that. I think so. Here's the thing, with a lot of solutions. This is more my personal opinion than anything else, but I'll still share it because I like to share things.
Go ahead. You're here for sharing. Go ahead, especially time.
There is a real challenge in healthcare because, as you mentioned, there's so many stakeholders involved. Fundamentally, the best products out there are designed by people that want to solve a challenge for themselves. That's a fact, right? You want to connect people wanted to connect with other people, talk to other people, so they design a messenger. People wanted to connect, like people wanted to connect to other people. They built social media. You wanted the internet on your phone. You build a phone, right? Like, so it is very easy to understand sort of if you're in that same situation, how would I build something that solves a problem for myself? In healthcare, that is not possible because there's almost nobody in the world who is a payer, there is nobody in the world who's a payer, a clinician, a patient, a caregiver, and a nurse. So that doesn't exist. So fundamentally, you run into that issue. Most of the time, that means a health tech founder is, in the extremes, one of two people. Either somebody coming from the outside or from the technology side who thinks healthcare, these technologies will work very well in healthcare, so I might as well try. Or it is someone who has been impacted by a personal story, or it could be a clinician, it could be a patient, whatever, but they're impacted by like a certain area. So that means they're heavily biased on that. That might not be a representative case because healthcare is also extremely convoluted, right? Like rarely is a patient journey the same for two patients. So that is sort of heavily biasing. Now that makes healthcare solutions, anything of what you just mentioned in terms of user centricity, very complex to manage. Because if you think about like how product design and how this comes to be is essentially in healthcare, you will never be that inside innovator who just solves for himself. So you'll always have to assume what is going on for someone else. Now, the way we approach that and the way I think that is sort of successful is exactly through the space of having people on board that can deliver that empathy, that have good frameworks and good ideas of how to connect and how to put themselves in the situation in order to get a good starting point. And then it becomes all about testing, right? You need to then run this very honestly by users. You need to, in our case, also have that relatively quickly in the market so that you can have these real world experiences, because testing can also be biased and it might not be fully reflective. So there is all of that aspect of, number one is how do you make sure your designers and your product people understand what's going on, understand all of the stakeholders and can design for all of these stakeholders. And then how do you set up a framework or a monitoring, a data collection exercise that enables you to figure out if this is actually working and what can be improved, and having a governance and a process in place to continuously evolve the product based on what you see in terms of usage. So this is how we try to approach it. We try to be very honest about the fact that we don't know anything from the start. You can spend years and years and spend millions researching sort of what would work in a given scenario, and you'll still fall short because when you actually hit the market, something didn't quite fit. Right? Famous attributed, probably not the right quote. Famous quote from Henry Ford, right? If I'd asked people what to build, they'd have said faster horses, and that's exactly the same thing that we have to see, right? Like you can research and you can stay theoretical for quite some time. You do need to know how to innovate, how to push things forward, and then how to test whether it is working or not. Again, within the confines of healthcare, so we're not testing anything that isn't safe.
No, precisely. And just to step back and continue with the COVID-19, the monitoring system that we were working on, and it was the heat of the moment. And going into New York City, we realized that loads of problems. One problem that we were looking to see that, okay, people were coming in droves, and the hospitals couldn't triage patients early enough, and they wouldn't know that, okay, who is hypoxic, who is not hypoxic. So you had to set up a system. You had to have the right questions up front that you can automate all those questions and decrease actually the load on the ER for the patients who are coming in, not just the ER, but also in the clinics. And when we walked in, we weren't entirely sure exactly how and what are the exact needs, and we had to tailor and get our tech team on board to, hey, we have to be on the dot with this. We have to be on the clock, working roughly 24 hours a day, and try to tweak the product, try to make sure that the product is actually useful for the inpatient, for the outpatient, for the nurses, for the admin staff, for the triage individuals. And this all needed to be done on a fast-paced basis. And you can only know, as you were just mentioning, that whether this product is going to be effective when you actually get there. When you get on the ground, you start to launch, you see, okay, day one, this thing is not working. Day two, yes, let's tweak it, and now it's going to be working. So you have to get the product out there. You have to you have to go where the patient is, where the doctor is, where the action is actually happening, and you may end up changing. And that is exactly how a lot of startups do. They
Oh,
have to get their MVP out into the market and then see how it goes. They have to have their own suppositions, of course, but you have to get the product out in the market and see how it goes, and be ready to change your mindset, be ready to flip your switch, and no, instead of on, it should be off. And
yeah,
you need to you be able to maneuver like that. And it's especially what you're talking about with Dawn Health, and even you may have other stakeholders involved, and who are your partners or companies you're working with. They may think that they know what they want, but until they actually get the product into the hands of the user, they're not actually sure whether that's going to be, and they may end up changing a few things. Has this been your experience?
yeah. I can tell you. So this is, I mean, obviously going back, it's one of the trends that we've seen. There has been, I mean, so we work mostly with pharma and medtech companies, right? So there have been a lot of failures. I cannot tell you, like the first few times after I had switched roles, so after I came into this, the first few times, it was very shocking for me to see the attitude from some people, right? The attitude from some people was, we've done this in the past, it doesn't work, right? I've launched so many apps and none of them work. And it took me a while to realize, actually, the first time that happened, to get to the point where it's like, yeah, but so why didn't it work, right? Like, describe to me the solution, and you get like this feeling of like, seems convoluted, seems like a difficult app. I don't know if I would use it. So then the question comes like, okay, what did the physician say that you tested this with? What did the patient say? Like, how did you like, oh yeah, that would have been too complicated, so we didn't include them. Like, well, there's your answer.
That's your answer, exactly.
That's not how you do it. So the trend has been to go more into the direction, obviously, of exactly what you just said, right? And our partners are very well educated in that space, right? And are very, like, we look for these because, as we said, we want to make solutions successful. So that it needs to be also driven internally on their side, right? And that is not something we have too much control over. So the understanding of, how do I launch this? What is my impact? I think that's what we work a lot with our partners, and sort of helping them understand what we can do, what we can measure, and what we can do in terms of improving the product and making sure that it is used. There are some question marks that are always coming up that, quite honestly, we need to do. But there's also some very, 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 very smart people working on sort of these aspects that make sure that whatever we launch, whatever we can launch, gets to the market as validated as possible, to make sure that a hypothesis of what is the value proposition that we're trying to deliver to healthcare here, right? What are we trying to change? That is sound, and that works, and that we can make sure, or that we can be confident that that solution will find uptake, and we actually get to the point where we can test and we can do that, right? Because a lot of the early sort of discussions was, well, fundamentally, if you design a bad app, you know that, I know that, right? You download an app. I think the general open rate of apps that are downloaded is already scary low, right? So you download an app, and I would be shocked if it's more than 1 in 2 that is being opened for even once. And I've observed myself, when I test new apps for a new area, right? There could be several things. There is a drop off within seconds, right? Within seconds, you look at the app and you're like, nope, not for me. Nope, I don't want to do that. Nope, I don't want to do that, right? So the time you get to test, that is super critical. So what you need to make sure is, when you hit the market, that you actually can get users in, and that these users start using your application, right? If you think of one of
You need to
the,
be able to see how you can improve engagement, how you can maintain engagement, how you can get people
exactly,
back. Engagement is the name, is the word here, right? Exactly.
100% agree. And I think, so if you go follow Nir Eyal's hooked method, right, for like habit forming products, be they good or bad, right? But if you look at that, I think he had a very good quote, and that is, you need 5% of your users to be using the product like you anticipate. If you can get that, you can build a really successful product. 5%. That's not that much, but a lot of people still fall short on that. And that's the one that we work with, right? So with our partners as well, we work on, okay, what's the hypothesis? What can we do to create a user base of which we can get, and we actually then hired 5%, but of which we can get 5% to use the product like we wanted to use it, and then focus on how we can grow that.
Exactly. And I mean, it of course depends on the product and the need and what it is. For example, when I worked on a blood pressure home monitoring system, so the person will get alerts. The person will get alerts to document their food intake or how they're feeling, or to okay, your blood pressure is high. Can you give me a little bit of feedback? What's happening in your life right now? And that would give the physician a bit more information about what to actually do with their medication, perhaps, or how to adjust their dietary intake or switch the medication around, possibly. So in that application, the patient has a vested interest in a way, and the doctor has a vested interest in a way, and the nurse also, who is involved in the care of that patient, is involved, and you can have a much higher engagement. But of course, it depends on the application, the app, the need, and how strongly the patient or the end user feels about it. So just engagement. And again, the reason we're talking about engagement is that, and I believe you were mentioning this as well, that if the application has basic bugs that the user will say, this is a rubbish application, I don't want to use it, I have spent already a few minutes, and a few minutes is all that a person can experience something bad about the application, that they can say, I'm not going to use this product. And that could piss people off, and it'll be very difficult for you to bring them back to use your application. So yeah, exactly. So engagement, getting it right, not getting a faulty product out there that the person will throw away. You can't do that. And yes, a lot of time just having 5% engagement can be huge, of course, depending on the value that you're providing, and depending on the actual product that is in the hand of the person.
Absolutely, yeah. It's always funny. In a recent discussion we had the analog of always think of it about coming back to the books. Like if you think about bookstores, I always like to use bookstores because they have various aspects that work very well in sort of translating, and obviously Amazon being one of the early disruptors, being an easy analog to use because people understand it, right? But going back to it used to be very obvious that a bookstore needed to have an appealing front, obviously, needed to be in a good location for people to go in, right? And then essentially people go in because they want to buy a book, or they're interested in books to some extent, right? So you draw that in. That is a fairly easy value proposition. In the digital age, that part is much more difficult to replicate, right? Because you don't fully know, like when you download an app, what you're getting into, right? It's like walking into a shop where you've seen a marketing front where like, I wonder what that is. And you walk in and you're like, okay, no, this is not what I wanted. And you walk out again. But then the important part comes about engagement. That's very interesting, because the way you would measure engagement in itself technically is a purely digital term, right? Like in the real world, by now it probably changes, but let's say 20, 30 years ago, nobody tracked where people are walking in a bookstore, right? Like there's a lot of knowledge and a lot of people in there to figure out, okay, which books do I place where do I, like, what's the flow that I want people to use, and so on and so forth. There's a little bit of research into that, and there's a lot of knowledge into that. But the amount of data that you can now look at, right, when the same thing would happen in a digital space, like where do they hover, how long do they spend here, how long do they spend there, how do I get them there, what works in terms of like getting them to a next action, and so on and so forth. That part is much more intriguing and much more important in a digital app, because you can optimize for it, right? And because you can optimize for it, you have to optimize for it, because everyone else is optimizing for it. So you're vying for the attention, and vying for that attention is, again, be it good or bad, is a reality of what's going on. If you don't grab the attention, if you don't fulfill a basic need, it's not going to work.
Right, exactly. No, so you talked about the structure of the team that needs to be there, and one big aspect is having a CTO, chief technical officer, and then of course the tech team needs to have the right skill sets and even the right experience. And if you drop in a full stack developer that does not have a health tech experience, you may not do that well. So have you had any problem with dealing with the tech side of this business, of the company? If yes, what were the problems, and how do you know go about solving for them?
I can't speak to actually if we had that. I mean, we tend to hire relatively experienced people. We tend to hire people that again are merged by that vision. So I can't actually speak to what we do there. I do know that I've worked with people where that became a huge challenge because of the entire incentive. You need to understand, right? And I don't need to tell you that, but the entire incentive of in healthcare, patient safety comes first, right? So nothing that's safe will get used or can show that it's safe will get used, will get seen, anything. That is very difficult for some of the more technology driven people because they would always assume that if something's better, it will get used. And that's not the case. Only if the checkbox of patient safety is done, then that comes in. That means that people coming from tech tend to have the tendency to think healthcare moves too slowly. And healthcare does move slowly, but healthcare moves slowly for a very good reason. And that aspect sort of can be a challenge, not so much because you bring the wrong skill set, because most of the time, if the problem is laid out correctly by, be it the CTO, be it the COO, be it somebody who understands like sort of that healthcare landscape and can translate to tech, if that is laid out clearly, then the problems themselves in health tech are never technology. The technology can do all the things that you want. It's always how it gets adopted and how it gets communicated, how it gets implemented and what works, right? That is the part that where everything, 99.9% of technologies fail because of that, not because of the technology. And I think that's something that is very difficult for some people to manage, because you could argue, and I've heard some people argue that technically healthcare for tech is boring because the challenges on the technology side are not there. You will have to be intrigued by and driven by that sort of need to help patients and to change things, and by the intricacies that come with it, right? Like, how do I build something that that can actually be adopted, and how can I support that overall mission? But that is the part that is fundamental to it.
Yeah, exactly. And I think the biggest portion is getting the homework done before the actual development takes place, and having the
Exactly.
right, of course, the experienced developers need to be there, but of course, you need to have the exact specifications, the flow, the diagrams, the things that need to be there to start implementing. And of course, that's with any startup as such, that you need to have a clear vision or clear description and clearly laid out specifications that you want to be done. And especially in healthcare, you get a product out there, you forgot its essential portion of it, you didn't realize it, and ended up being a bug or a feature that was really essential, then you run into problems. So you may have so just to talk about health tech startups, and there are a lot of people out there who are looking to go into health tech. And would you have any background information about how Dawn Health started? Did it start out from a garage? Did it start out from an apartment? Were they sleeping on a couch? What was happening? And can you walk us through your journey or their journey for this company, from a nascent company to something that much bigger right now? Do you have any insight about what happened? And so we can look to share with people what you could expect to experience and the steps that people can potentially, have to go through to come into a more successful stage, to get to a more successful stage.
I mean, I can only admire people to have that stamina. I think don't expect anything easy being served to you. You know, our founder loves talking, talks about sort of having slept on the floor in the office, living out of the car for a while, really making sure that everything is running smoothly and working literally to the bone, right? I think that is something that comes with a lot of sacrifice. I think that's not easy, and it's admirable, but I would never recommend anyone to go into that if they want an easy solution or an easy life ahead of them. So yeah, that would be my number one thing. Listening to
This is not for the
our founder.
faint-hearted. This is not for the
Oh no.
faint-hearted. Yeah, this is not for the faint-hearted. And yes, please, what happened next?
No, I think with success, with that dedication, comes success, come clients, and comes the as with anything. I think you need to get to the point where you have validated and have verified that you're doing something right and you're doing something worthwhile, that people will want to join that mission, right? And when people want to join that mission and clients want to buy into that mission, that's when you know you're doing something worthwhile. And that's when things start taking off, but don't expect it to become easy at that stage, right? There's different challenges along the way, all the time. So we 2 years ago had raised, the company had raised Series A, to turn from what used to be professional services, so much like a consultancy, to more of a product-driven company, developing products and streamlining product development and optimizing product development, so that we can be more sound. But look, there's always challenges. I've only worked in small companies, but I've always worked with big companies, so there's always small company problems that are associated to running a business, right? And these challenges will only become more and more significant. When you're in healthcare, there is always a next frontier. There's always this next thing that is coming up. It could be, as we said at the start, right? Like, it could be that you're approaching a new stakeholder, you're trying to sell to a new stakeholder, you're trying a new user group to adopt your solution. All of this will bring its own challenges, right? Like, as soon as you try bridging across, it will become more challenging. I always like to say that healthcare is like I always react allergic to when somebody says, yeah, we're trying to fix healthcare as a startup, right? Because that is by default a bad goal. Like, anyone who would like, if you're
No.
looking to goal setting, like, that's the worst goal you can have. And I think that sort of mindset, if you have that, you try to go too broad too quickly. And I think the reality of these startups is you need to take incremental steps. You need to know where your technology and where your business is driving, but you need to have enough foresight to know where the industry is going, where the needs are going, and where you can actually make a difference. And I think that's the sort of balance you always have to strike, where you can go very badly wrong.
No, exactly. And fixing healthcare is, well, you can't fix healthcare, because if you say that, then I think you need 10 of you, or a million of you, to go into different aspects of healthcare to fix. There's so many aspects of healthcare to fix, and not to mention, um, there's a different model in the US and Canada. It's different in the UK. It's different. So every place has
Ask
their own.
Babylon.
Yeah. What happened to Babylon, right? What happened to Babylon?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh
No, I
my
mean,
God.
ask Babylon, right? Like, that's the number one lesson learned is, yeah, it's difficult to expand. It's difficult to scale, right? Like, I mean, I've only read about it and listened to a lot of people talking about it. But the fundamental thing is, I think I always like to think of Babylon. Not that Babylon, I mean, it might have had its flaws, but fundamentally where it suffers is when you try to scale within healthcare and you try to go too broad within healthcare, not anticipating the challenges between, exactly what you said, between different systems, right? I think it was different systems in the UK sort of were scalable, and then you go into new health systems within the US, and not even within the US the systems are unified. So everything you do is not necessarily, there is no benefit of scalability, right? Like, what you would usually have is, like, every incremental health system you have needs to become cheaper at adding in and at using your service. If you cannot get there, and that's really difficult to get there, essentially every time you launch a new product, so either it becomes incredibly difficult to manage, or you will run out of funding, just because that is expensive to
Yeah.
run. And because if there is no volume benefits, then there is no benefit for you to go there.
Yeah, for the US, it's completely different. I think the way the US healthcare is run, and I believe you are experiencing this as well. And the good thing is you are doing B2B largely. And that's probably is in your favor, that those people already have an idea and they already are in the market in a way. But this takes us into the business development standpoint and the marketing standpoint. And nothing is without marketing, nothing is without business development, especially when you are into B2B. And with your role, how do you operate? And can you shed some light? How do you interact with people? How do you find new clients? How do you work with them?
So I think every person has a little bit of a different approach to that. I think you need to find out what works for you. So I think for me, for in our case, relatively quickly you start realizing that essentially you need to find the right partners. And when I say partners, I really mean partners, right? I mean, you need to get into contact with. You cannot be afraid of asking, you cannot be afraid of contacting. I'm also going to be honest. I know I'm a person who can be particularly annoying via messages and emails and everything. To get to the point where you talk to people, and then when you do talk to these different stakeholders within the client companies, you quickly start realizing who you're on the same page with and who you're not on the same page with. Not being on the same page can be because they don't share your view of the landscape. It can be because they're not at the right stage. It might be they're looking for something else. It might be they have different political agendas. It might be they have a different strategy than what you would need, or what you believe in, or what would work with you. So the moment you find these people that work with you, I myself mostly see myself as an enabler, right? Because they have some great ideas. Some ideas I sprinkle in, some things I come in, but it's a lot about structuring their ideas. It's a lot about fulfilling their ideas, translating their ideas into what can become a reality, and working with them. Because usually, I mean, that's the beauty of working in digital health. Digital health is not something where people go into because they're bored, or that's something that they naturally progress, right? Most people choose to go into digital health for very specific reasons. So there is a lot of innovators. There's a lot of very creative people, incredibly smart people that work in that space, who you just have to work with in order to figure out, okay, how is that moving forward? How can we move that forward? What's the reality, right? You sometimes you pressure test things a little bit, sometimes you message test things a little bit, but essentially you work with these people to enable them as much as possible to figure out which of their ideas they can realize in their own companies and not. And then through that relationship, you start forming these products, or start making these products become a reality. And I think that in the B2B world, in digital health, I'm going to be very honest, this is probably fairly special to digital health. I think if you don't find the people on the client side, right? If you don't find the people, you don't have a product, you don't have a company. It is a purely people-driven business. There is very little that I can put out as a product that somebody will just come to me and buy. I'm not going to be so presumptuous as to assume that will ever happen. There's some ideas that you can sprinkle, but most of the time, it is driven by the people.
And of course, the industry that you're working with, they already have an idea about what they want to do, and they have the target audience in mind, and they maybe already possibly have the reach as well.
Yeah.
And so I think the question is, and if you are okay in sharing, how do you actually reach out to, let's say, a pharmaceutical company? How do you reach out to, let's say, a hospital system? How do you get your foot in the door? And normally that's the biggest thing for hurdles for any startups who are coming up, that, hey, how do I get that one connection that I'm going to develop, and how do I find people who actually need something to be developed, or a tech partner perhaps?
So there's the two approaches, right? Cold and warm, if you so want. Let's start with the warm, because that's easier. It's literally just ask people. People typically want to help, and people are typically open to help. So there is the simple way of just going into, literally walking into a hospital. I'm not saying I've done that, but walking into a hospital and asking around until you find
I have done that.
get referred to that person.
I have literally walked into a
that, yeah.
hospital. I have done that. I have done that. Yes, please go ahead.
And I think that is something that you can definitely do. I think you can do that virtually, right? You can reach out. I mean, LinkedIn is one of those tremendous opportunities, where you can just reach out to people that ask for help. Maybe you even know these people, or know that these people know each other. Quite honestly, I also just contact people, such as yourself, such as anyone, to talk about the landscape in general, to talk about some ideas that we might be having. And from that, more often than not, right? Like if you share the right things, they will want to help you, or you might just ask them, hey, who would I talk to about this? And then that happens, right? So the warm path is relatively easy. Again, the world is not so big. The world is not so big that I cannot find someone. The cold outreach is a little bit different. I think the cold outreach, you need to be very aware of, literally finding emails, contacting people on LinkedIn, someone by job title, you get a list of people that attended a certain conference or something of the sort. I think there's two things that you need to be aware of. Number one, your messages and drawing people in needs to be short enough for them to understand what you're doing or to find it interesting. But the more important part is you don't know their situation, you don't know what they're looking for, you don't know exactly what's going on in their life. You will have to reach out to a lot of people. Do not expect that a single message is going to get an answer. You will have to reach out repeatedly. You will have to reach out multiple times. You will have to know, like, is this the right person to actually spend this effort or not? And even if you have the right person and you know exactly that you can help them, don't expect an answer. This is a pretty busy world. Again, we're vying for attention of people. So in the cold aspect, I think you always have to say, it's like sowing seeds, right? You're sowing the seeds, and you hope that at some point somebody,
right,
comes back to you and says, yes, this is exactly what I need, and then you can have a conversation from there. It's very difficult to assume from the outside, this person works here and does this. I'm sure I can help them. I really desperately need them to answer to me, because this is just not a reality in our world.
right. So cold outreach, warm outreach. Do you also do cold calling?
I do not. I do not do cold calling. I know people do. That's what I said in the beginning. People tend to need to find their own way. I can be honest with you. I hate being cold called, so I would not be comfortable cold calling. I'm also someone who rarely answers their phone. I do text messages, so you're more likely to reach me that way. But I think that's the part where you need to be very comfortable, right? I think if you can't be authentic, if you can't be transparent, you're not gonna build a relationship. You're not gonna make people want to talk to you. And if I can't do that via call, I'm not doing that. But
No, exactly. Yeah.
again, this is for me. I heard that it can be very effective.
Right. A lot of people they have a hybrid approach, and they go through LinkedIn, they go through personal contacts perhaps, and find people different ways. And cold calling is one of them. And cold calling can be very, very tedious, very difficult. In a way, what you hear from the legacy marketers, that's basically how they grew up.
Yeah.
And they say you gotta be cold calling. You gotta cold call 4,000 people, not 4,000, 400 people per day, and you'll get 2 people to actually talk to you. And they say it's about the numbers. The more effective cold calls, of course, you have to have your sales script in line. You have to have, you need to be ready to say something when that person just say, yeah, hey, okay, yes, what do you, yes, I need something, we can talk about it. What do you, you need to be able to say, okay, yeah, can you have 5 minutes? I can talk to you. I can give you a small spiel, or let's schedule for a time later today. I'm available today. You have to work on that. But a lot of people vouch for it, and they say, okay, this is what you have to do. But again, whatever works for you. So
Yes,
since
exactly.
you are in this field, and you are reaching out to people who may be needing help, who may be having ideas, what is the future of digital therapeutics? What is the future that you are seeing right now, especially with the changing environment with AI, large language models? What have you seen right now? What is the future of digital health?
That is an exciting question. I think you name it.
It's a
There's so
huge
many
question.
areas.
I think
Yeah, it's
the
a huge
avenues are
question.
huge. Yes.
So I think, okay, let me think about it this way. So I can talk about sort of regulation and evidence. I can talk about, I think, business models, and I can talk about just the general generative AI field. But let me start maybe with the first one. So the regulated products, the evidence that sort of goes with that, right? I think there is a tremendous push to go in that direction and to accurately go in that direction. I think the interesting point right now is that people that we talk to have two reactions to software as a medical device, to regulated products, right? They either say, oh, we've done that. Ooh, that sounds lengthy. Ooh, that sounds complicated. I'd rather do something simple. Or they say, yeah, it needs to be that. Like, you need to have that capability. Otherwise, I'm not working with you, because, well, why would I work with anyone who doesn't have that capability? I think both are fair. Both are informed by the strategy. Both are informed by what needs to be done. In general, I can say that the drive towards more regulated product, obviously it needs to be set up correctly, and that's not something that is easily done. You cannot just decide a digital health product at some point is regulated or will become regulated. By that point, it's too late. It's going to be very, very annoying for you to catch up. So if you plan for that, and if you have that on your roadmap for a digital health product, I think it makes it more exciting. It makes it better. With that comes the sort of need to create evidence. So not necessarily in that order, not from a regulatory perspective, but from my personal perspective. So the future of digital therapeutics, as you asked, is, I think, going in that direction. Too many products have, even some that are regulated, potentially have absolutely no evidence. And I think,
yes,
again,
exactly.
if we think of
just to interject just a little bit, you have to have the value proposition there. I mean, I could think as a physician, I could think of 20 products right now that I would feel, hey, I like it, I want this. But is it actually producing a change? Is it actually moving the needle? And at the end of the day, in a for-profit model, especially in the US, it has to either reduce costs, visibly reduce costs, not 10 years down the line from now,
exactly.
or bring in money. And healthcare executives, or anything for that matter, they're not thinking about 2 years down the line. They're thinking about 2 months down the line. If you can do something for 2 months down the line, maybe they will agree to it. But 2 years down the line, they're not sure they're going to be in that job anymore. So you have to have something right now. Yes, please.
No, absolutely, and I think that's a very. I mean, that brings us to the business model in just a second. But I think for me, that's the interesting part, because I think you had it right there. You as a physician, right, and you might be someone who is more interested to look at technologies. But if you think about it, it literally takes a single developer to launch an app, more or less, right? So the barrier to entry to launch an app is just ridiculously low. That means we have, I forgot the last count, 350,000 health apps currently active, or something like that.
How couple are mine. Couple of them are mine.
Yeah, no, I mean, to be fair, but how would you pick, as a physician who knows nothing, right? Like, how would you pick out of, like, you're never gonna, I mean, that's literally how Netflix got famous, is, yeah, there's too many movies I can't pick for myself, so I need an algorithm to do it for me, right? That algorithm doesn't exist. Nobody's going to build that algorithm. People are going to go crazy building that algorithm. But what you do is one of those frameworks that you use in that. And that is literally, okay, is the product regulated? No, I'm not interested in looking at it, because if it's not regulated, I can't say that it's safe, right? I mean, medical device regulation is literally to make sure that your product is safe for the patient, for a physician, for anyone. So if it's not regulated, I'm not interested. Might be the best app in the world, I'm not recommending it. Same goes then with evidence, right? As you just said, I'm interested in what it does. I mean, it can look nice on the surface, but if it doesn't change it, worse, if it creates more work for me as a physician, if it makes my patients less comfortable, if it actually causes, or if it, like, let's face it, also, if it causes them to drive away, like go down with patient satisfaction, worse outcomes, and so on and so forth. How am I going to say that is not a possibility, right? So without evidence and without being regulated, you simply shouldn't be used. And that's, I think, something that a lot of people try to realize. Again, there is the aspect of saying, okay, I don't want regulated because I want something quick and easy. There are all these arguments to be made, and I think you just need to be very realistic about the roadmap. But for me, that is where luckily, with a lot of the education, with a lot of the solutions that are coming out there, more physicians that maybe are not as much into technology start asking these questions. They're like, yeah, but if it's like, why would I, right? Like, you're used to working with drugs who have years and years and years of science behind them. And I think it is fair to some extent to help digital therapeutics to the same standard.
Exactly. So, I mean, now since we understand that there has to be a business model behind everything, and there has to be the tech is largely the easier side of this, but the business model, the planning, the implementation, the legalities, regulation needs to be really at the forefront of any of this, right? So, however, the question comes in over here is that, uh, given all these complexities, are we able to actually move the needle with regards to chronic disease management? Is chronic diseases actually, do you feel with what you're doing and what you're looking at in the field, chronic disease such as heart disease, high blood pressure, diabetes, that lead to all types of ailments in society, with all of these restrictions within healthcare tech, especially in healthcare tech, have you seen that the move will, do you see that the needle will be moving towards a positive change?
I strongly believe so. I think the fundamental challenge is here going back to the business model, because moving the needle is actually not necessarily, there is enough literature to indicate that, I mean, let's face it, improving adherence, making sure patients communicate the right things, making sure the patients understood why they would need to take their medication, making sure they take their medication. There's very fundamental things that are, I'm not going to say broken in healthcare, but they don't work, that are relatively easy to fix with the right approaches, where digital is a very, very promising lead, where it's also been shown that that is an effective channel for these kinds of challenges. So yes, it can work. I think the more interesting part is, how would you get it to work? Because the business models behind it are very, very non-established, very difficult. I think there have been a few recent news, right? Like, you can take Pear Therapeutics going bankrupt through the prescription route, where they basically said, you know what, payers are not ready, physicians are not ready to prescribe, payers are not ready to reimburse, and patients are not ready to download. So even if a solution works, it's no guarantee for success. Akili went the other direction, right? Akili went into saying, okay, you know what, prescription doesn't work, we'll go into over the counter, basically meaning patients have to pay out of pocket for it. That's that. It doesn't require a prescription, but it is regulated. So you see those business models evolving a little bit, right? And we've seen that. I think WellDoc, if I'm not mistaken, was the first one that sort of became regulated, was FDA cleared, and then quickly said, like, yeah, you know what, we're only going to employers. This is not going to be worth our while to change how healthcare is delivered, right? So I think they can change the needle. I think the most important part is how companies will figure out how they will get them to change the needle. And so far as, number one, physicians want to prescribe, payers want to pay for it, or patients want to pay for it, whatever, hospital systems want to pay for it, somebody has got to pay for it. So you need to get that value proposition just right. And I think that's the part that's going to be very interesting. I'm not going to say that's a trend, but that's going to be very interesting to watch, which business models are successful and where they come from.
Exactly. So in the US, you have remote patient monitoring, and there are reimbursement codes for patients for oxygen devices, blood pressure devices, glucometers, and this is built into the scheme of things. Because we actually did develop platforms where you could connect patients with these devices and look to provide real-time value. And I think this is where chronic disease management is going to be going. That with the help of AI, you could have aspects where you can give patient recommendations in the patient's house, in the patient's rehab center or a nursing facility. And of course, the regulation needs to come into this and see how this can be aptly done safely and without any legal repercussions. But this is exactly, I believe, that the healthcare should be going in the future. And for me, I would say, okay, get all the peripherals in, get the stethoscopes in. I want everything done from the clinician standpoint. But again, the reimbursement has to be there. It has to be profitable. It has to be viable. Otherwise, it won't work out. And a lot of companies are in this space with remote patient monitoring right now. And I believe the more we expand it with AI and generative AI coming into the mix, I believe this is going to, the next couple of years, all of these companies are going to be getting on board. And I believe there's going to be a huge revolution with patient at home care will be driving a lot of positive health outcomes. Of course, we have to tease out all the variables and tease out all the specific use cases. As you, of course, you went into multiple myeloma and you look at all the different diseases and what are the essential aspects of the diseases that these products, digital health, peripherals, blood pressure devices, etc., these can help out in actually improving outcomes. And you're probably seeing this in the market right now, since you are connecting with so many stakeholders right now.
Yeah, thanks for sharing your perspective as well. I think there's a tremendous push here, and I think there is an incredible opportunity to leverage. I mean, generative AI has for me, huge potential, right? It opens up a new way of consuming data, if you so want, for us, because it can start translating, right? Like if you looked at, I mean, yesterday Gemini was released, and if you look at how these things are being done, I think there is going to be a very interesting time ahead of us in figuring out how you can use that safely and effectively to the point of where it comes. But you're absolutely right. I think we're entering an area or an era where chronic disease management will start looking very differently. There will be very specific cases where certain technologies can be used first. But there will also be a lot of testing and trying and sort of adapting that. I think for me, for example, I'll give you an example. I think one of the areas that I found most fascinating most recently is something that actually doesn't come out of chronic disease management, but you can easily see how it will start applying. That's Whoop, right? They make wearables for monitoring your sleep, I mean, basically heart rate and heart rate variability. But what they started doing is, with all of the data they collect and with all of the accelerometers and so on and so forth, right? They get a pretty good picture of how you slept and what your exercise level usually is and so on and so forth. And they built in generative AI to basically say, okay, you know what? I have all that data about me. Now can I ask the tool some questions? I can just ask it, what's my ideal exercise today? What can I do to sleep better? What can I do about that, right? And the accessibility increase is so much higher than just showing someone the data. And I think in healthcare, and that's why I'm saying that, we're used very much to catering to those 5% of people. And there's again a 5%. It's a different 5% than before, but it is 5% again that can deal with that and that are driven by data. So when I show them their blood pressure, they know how to deal with that at certain times. And you mentioned this before, right? Like that they can add notes and so on and so forth. And there is going to be a natural source of people who will be able to deal just with the data and drawing their own logical conclusions and making changes accordingly. But now we're entering into that field where that on its own is not necessary anymore. With generative AI in chronic disease management, by just showing them, showing a diabetic their HbA1c and their blood glucose and fasting blood glucose and so on and so forth, they don't need to understand those aspects anymore. I'm sure they do at the moment, but you can now ask them, what should I have for dinner, right? Like you can ask, what should I have for dinner? What can I have now? Is it safe to have this snack right now? Am I okay to do exercise? Like all of these things, right? It becomes so much more accessible for chronic disease management, because essentially we're also running out of physicians. So you're not, like with more diabetics, you're not going to ask your physician that all the time. You don't want to make anyone available all the time. So it's going to free up so much time to focus on that patient care, on where the physician provides them most value, besides that generative AI piece. And I know, by the way, that is still far away, right? Like I'm not saying we're launching that tomorrow, but we're surprised by how quickly things move. So I'm very, very bullish on that.
No, I'm not bullish. I've talked to a company who is actually doing this, but they're not going through the payer route, and they're going for wellness companies as such, and smartwatches. People have their smartwatches, but exactly what the real benefit that the patient is going to get from the smartwatches is not just by looking at, okay, my heart rate variability is this, but exactly as you said, what they can do to improve upon it, what they can do with their next meal, and how they can improve on this. So this is there.
I
is
mean,
there.
yes, and it's going to be fascinating to watch. I mean, that is
Yeah.
opening its own can of worms, and it's going to be so much fun. I mean, I'm an enthusiast in that as well, so I'm looking forward to using those kinds of tools and testing the limits of
Right.
them.
I actually have this device. Let me just show this to the audience. This is a blood pressure, or hopefully I charge this, but this has blood pressure cuffs on it as such, and this is a wrist device. And I've actually tested it out. It's actually very, very accurate. And actually have a video on it on my YouTube channel. Actually, I have a health related YouTube channel, and I have a different podcast for health related topics. Dr. Khan show is not Khanversations that is right now. And I talk about all aspects health and generally the general public who are interested in health. And this device measures my blood pressure on my wrist. And these things are there. And I know iPhones, the Apple Watch and all of these, the companies, they're using different modalities to measure blood pressure and glucose to different means. And this is going to be the future of healthcare, where you will have a hospital, not a hospital, basically a clinic. You can maintain a clinic basically at home. And what you needed to do at the doctor's office by getting your blood pressure tested or your sugars tested, or your stethoscope readings, everything will be available in house in your own home where you are, for yourself, for your kids. And this is where a lot of the tech innovation is going to be happening. And there's already lots of work already done with this. And I would think there's a lot of money to be made along with providing better outcomes and providing all of this value. So this is, as an enthusiast, as you mentioned that you are, I think we are both mutual in this. And this is the exciting world that we are going to be living in. And they said that healthcare is, I think, 70% of the data that's being collected on Earth. So get ready for a huge explosion of healthcare data that's going to be coming up. And for myself, I'm glad that back in the day when I started my practice working, I started off with a medication list and reminder application. I saw that patients are coming into the hospital, and there comes a time where lifestyle and dietary modifications won't really help you. You need medications. You need that diabetes medication. You need that blood pressure medication. And people are missing those medication. And they're coming in with heart attacks, strokes, just because they missed a couple of medication. And they're going to DKA. They're almost to the point of dying. And that's what we do. We try to recover them. And the biggest reason was they're forgetting to take their medication when they need to take it. And so that's how my health tech entrepreneurial journey as it started. And that's how I got into tech. And I wasn't necessarily sleeping on a couch or sleeping in the car, as you mentioned that the Dawn Health founders were doing. I was already practicing. But yes, so that's how I saw a need, and I saw as a clinician and something that I can improve, and I went into it. And that's it. That's the name of the game. And I think this is going to be huge and changing landscape. Johannes, it has been a pleasure. But
Likewise.
yes, it has been a pleasure. For the people who are looking to get into health tech, can you give a piece of advice? And I know you've worked with different startups and early stage startups. What is your best piece of advice you want to provide to them for them just getting off the ground, or they already have a little bit of leverage and they want to take the next step?
Sorry, I had to switch my headphone. My headphone ran out of battery. So advice for health tech startups. I think know your user. I think is the first one. Often underestimated, right? Like don't go too deep. Be aware of when you need to actually run something, but you need to know your user. I think that is too often underappreciated. It's also find the right people in healthcare that can guide you. There's very smart people, there's very helpful people that sort of will work with you. Don't try to do it in a silo. I think that's asking for advice, asking for feedback is very good to get you to guide you in the right direction. There is something to be said here. Don't get distracted. Like believe in your idea, but I think you need to be aware of what might be the objections, because in healthcare, they tend to come fast, they tend to come from all different directions, and they can tend to come very hard. So that is something that you want to anticipate as much as you can. And I think first and foremost, as I said, right, like this, everything is still very much people driven. So be clear on the mission, be clear on what you want to change, and find the right people around you that believe in that same change. I think it's invaluable to have a dedicated, inspired, motivated team that supports that entire mission. If you can't find those people, there is a very high chance that your product will fail, and for that specific reason, right? But I think that specialization is so important, because in healthcare, you're not going to be able to do everything on your own. You're not going to be able to manage all the stakeholders and put yourself into all the stakeholders. So you will need as much help as you can get. So you have to ask.
Excellent. Yeah, definitely. I'm just going to finish up with a few rapid fire questions. So what one piece of advice you would give to a startup founder? Just one.
Just one to a startup founder?
Yes.
Ask for help.
Ask for help. Yes. And don't do it alone. I think that's what you're suggesting. Yeah. Don't do it alone. You're pretty smart, but don't do it alone. You got to find somebody. You don't know tech, find a tech CTO, find a team that knows what they're doing. Find a business partner, find somebody in marketing. Don't do it alone. Ask for legal help if you need to. Okay. Next, what is one book that you would recommend people, and why?
Okay, now Thinking Fast and Slow, Daniel Kahneman, and I think it was Cass Sunstein, but it's an amazing book on behavioral science, the human mind, how decision-making work, what the biases are. If you want to have a little bit of a dialed down version, you could also read Predictably Irrational by Dan. I forgot the last name. That's so bad. That could also be very helpful. But those are fascinating books for me. I can keep going. I have lots of books that I would recommend, but these Thinking Fast and Slow was mind-blowing.
Generative AI, where's it going in healthcare?
I can tell you fast. I don't know exactly where it's going. It's going there fast. I think so. It is technically regulated. I'm very curious to see how the regulation comes in with that. I think it will go into administrative tasks first. I think there's tremendous opportunity to just optimize workflows. So writing claims, writing physician notes, right? All of these things, I think, is the sort of easy pickings for generative AI, and that's where it's going to go. But I think it does go much more broadly from drug discovery to patient delivery through anything, depending on how quickly the technology can be made safe.
Exactly. All right. Thank you, Johannes, for sharing your journey and wisdom with us. And thank you to our listeners for joining us on this enlightening exploration. Until next time, keep pushing boundaries and questioning the status quo as we continue to explore the fascinating world of tech startups and businesses and the people who drive them forward. Thank you, Johannes, so much.
Pleasure.
All right. So thanks for watching. And if you like this, consider sharing it with your family, your friends, your business colleagues. And check out this other video. I'm sure you will find this interesting. Bye for now. I appreciate you as a valuable viewer, and thanks for watching till the very end. If you liked this, check out this podcast. I know you will love it. You can also check for more interesting links in the description. I'm Dr. Umer Khan. Looking forward to seeing you again. Thank you.